A few years ago, I made a video about the first season of Mushoku Tensei and how I felt like a lot of people weren't really internalizing what made that series so special. Both the people who disliked the series and thought that everything it did was just crass and distasteful, but also the people who did like the series and seemed to be focused on more superficial aspects, stuff that I also thought were cool, but weren't quite the stuff that really drew me into the series. In my opinion, what really sets Mushoku Tensei apart from other isekai, and just other anime in general, is the level of maturity that it executes a lot of its storytelling and character writing with. No, I'm not talking about maturity in a gore or pervasive language sense, but I'm also not talking about it in a highly intellectual, too smart for you political sense. The maturity that I'm talking about is simply being able to tackle mature subjects and tackle them in a way that feels fittingly mature and respectful. A father who cheats on his wife and struggles to repair his relationships with his family. A blossoming relationship and love between these two characters that ends up resulting in heartbreak and just loneliness. A NEET from the real world who is learning to give himself another chance and live the life that he's always wanted. These are all things that are heavy, complicated, difficult topics and themes to explore in a story, so much so that you rarely even see stories try to attempt to explore them in meaningful ways. And yet, Mushoku Tensei not only seems to willingly throw itself into all of these cursed, sacrilegious topics, but it also manages to usually execute on them in a way that feels compelling and interesting. So what does a series like that tackle in its second season after ending its first with arguably its most impactful and most mature theming yet? Where do you go to continue this story's streak of touching the untouchable? Well, erectile dysfunction. Yeah. Season 2 picks up right where Season 1 left off, and this is one of the things that really stuck out to me the most about this entire storyline within Season 2 Part 1. The fact that everything that happened in those last 2 episodes of the series were such a big deal and such a large form of trauma for Rudeus's life and psychological state that he is actively spending pretty much the entirety of this entire core struggling to move past that and overcome his inner conflict. You have to keep in mind that Rudeus's self-esteem and his inner ego itself right now is incredibly fragile. Even after Roxy gave him the push that he needed to go out into the real world, it's not like he's some Casanova who can withstand any kind of emotional pain. In fact, he's still vulnerable to all of those things just like he was before. He just never really had to deal with it up until that point in the story. And his relationship with Eris was obviously so important to him that he's naturally not going to get over that easily, especially when he's all by himself now. The entire Rudeus-Eris relationship in Season 1 was easily my favorite through line to follow within the series. I said it in that original maturity video, and I'll say it again here. I genuinely think that that is the core of the entire first season. That relationship is everything that is driving the story, and it's also why the ending of that season is as impactful as it is. So obviously, I am a huge fan of having Season 2's entire focus be a continuation from that. We're not just going to move on from location to location, plotline to plotline again. We actually have to deal with Rudeus's inner feelings before we can move on properly. I love that. And that's a big reason why erectile dysfunction in this series, as stupid as that sounds, actually goddamn works. It's not treated like some silly joke or some mockery of Rudeus. It is a literal embodiment of Rudeus's inability to move on from that trauma and from that relationship. It is a little comical in how literal of a symbol it actually is, but at the same time, it works surprisingly well as a plot element to show what Rudeus is trying to ultimately solve and what he needs to do to solve it. And this is where we get into the actual focus and the actual core of what Season 2 is trying to achieve. And that would be the romance and relationship between Rudeus and Sylphie. I have to reiterate, not even a few minutes later, again, by far my favorite aspect of Season 1 of Mushoku Tensei was this relationship between Eris and Rudeus. It's the kind of relationship that in a lesser writer's hands could easily feel very underwritten and very shallow. I mean, this isn't actually a romance series. This relationship is unfolding in the background of all of these action-adventure plotlines that are spanning all of these different continents. And because of that, I feel like if their dynamic and if their chemistry wasn't as perfect as it was, it could have easily fallen too far into the background and ended up feeling tangential to the overarching story, which would be pretty bad since the entire overarching goal is getting her back home. That relationship is crucial to that storyline. It's because of all of these little moments between them along the way, the different ways that you see them grow closer to each other and how their relationship develops, that is all what ultimately pays it off, and that is what makes it my favorite part of Mushoku Tensei. And it's why I personally think that even despite not being a romance series in a literal sense, I genuinely think Mushoku Tensei has some of the most compelling examples of romance that I have seen across the entire medium. All of this is what makes Season 2's approach to romance all the more interesting, because not only is it very much still important to the core story, it's more important, and it's way more focused on than it ever was before in Season 1. We're not in the background anymore. This is the sole focus of this entire part. Rudeus attempting to move on from Eris through both Sarah and Sylphie is pretty much the essence of this entire core, and I find it interesting how despite romance being important in both seasons of Mushoku, these seasons and the way that it's handled between these different characters couldn't be more different from each other. With Eris in Season 1, the relationship that unfolded felt very informed by the characters' ages. Rudeus is just a lot more immature. The dynamic between them is a lot more playful, and most importantly, it feels like Rudeus has a pretty good understanding of how he feels about Eris pretty early on in the series. By the time they get transported and are in this very desperate situation, they've already known and been together for several years at this point, and you already get the sense that he does love her very dearly, and she loves him as well. All of this is in contrast to how Season 2 handles its relationship between Rudeus and Sylphie, because similarly, Rudeus has also known Sylphie for a long time as well, and also loves her very much. But because he spends most of this season completely oblivious to who she actually is, you get this wonderful arc of Rudeus having this incredibly pure affection and pure love being created out of essentially nothing. None of this is coming from the person who Rudeus knew in the past, or even just a random attraction to a girl in general. He literally falls in love with somebody that he believes to be a guy just because of how organically he's attracted to who Sylphie is as a person. It's watching this relationship slowly unfold over the season, watching them spend more time together, watching these intimate situations that end up forming between them, seeing Rudeus slowly realize his own feelings. All of that is special, not only existing in the first place, but being so focused on and brought to the forefront. I really don't think people appreciate being able to actually watch these intimately sexual scenes between Rudeus and Sylphie, at least on a narrative level. You guys know what I'm talking about. Stuff like that, or even just some of the offhand comments that characters make throughout the series that are sexual in nature, these are things that most anime would treat as taboo, and yet Mushoku Tensei fully embraces them where it's practically second nature to the story. You forget that this is an anime that probably has censorship laws or things that can't be shown. You forget that we live in a world where you can't even talk about sex without it being a big deal. Everything just unfolds so organically, and it's always in service of the characters and the ways that they would realistically interact. That is what made this season so special for me, and it's just once again incredibly solid proof that this series understands how to convey mature stories and mature relationships in a very heartfelt way. It's also what gets me excited for the future of this series, because by the end, Rudeus and Sylphie have decided to move along their relationship straight into goddamn marriage. And if you want to talk about Mushoku Tensei delving into things that aren't usually explored, marriage and the implications of just having a wife are certainly not things that you see explored very often. How will his parents react? How will his siblings? How will Eris? That's an entire relationship still being left in the open. Will he have kids? How far in the future are we exploring? There's so many possibilities with the way Mushoku Tensei is structured across Rudeus's life, and I just can't wait to see where we go from here. It's what interested me in the series to begin with, and it's what continues to be the most exciting and most mature angle this story continues to take. Join the Discord server in the description if you want to talk about Mushoku Tensei or any other anime in general. Like the video if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new. I love you all so much, and I will see you in the next video.